On this episode of Modern Greaser, the 1965 GTO suspension receives a major upgrade with these Aldan American coilovers. Join my friend Kevin and I as we lead you through the process step by step in removing the stock springs and installing the new coilovers. You may want to grab your jean jacket because all this wrenching on this old muscle car is pretty cool. Whoa, pump the brakes. Before we start any work on this 1965 GTO, make sure you get over to the channel and subscribe to Modern Greaser. We have all kinds of cool, crazy automotive content, whether it's new vehicles, old vehicles. I have a friend that's doing that ambulance converted RV setup, so just get over there and give us a like and a follow and all that stuff. Say, man, do you subscribe to Modern Greaser? It'd be a lot cooler if you did. Kevin's good at jacking things, huh?
Since I was about 13.
So let's give you an idea of where this setup is rubbing. So right here, this is the inner fender well, and it's bare metal. I see up here. See, I had like painter's tape up here. Like, that's how dumb I am. I was like, I'll put painter's tape on this. That'll keep it from rubbing. So the first thing we're gonna do is actually pull off this caliper setup here. And there's two 15mm bolts back here. One here, one up here. So you trust your life with my jack stand placement, huh?
They aren't Harbor Freight, right?
They're not Harbor Freight, no.
Then yes.
So the caliper is hung out of the way, safe and sound. The rotor is off, and the next thing we're gonna do is we're going to take off the sway bar bolt here. And then there is a cotter pin back here on this, and we're gonna pop that out of there. And just break this nut loose, but don't take it all the way off. So you can see right here, this is actually my attempt at stiffening these springs is by putting in this rubber stop block. Now on this 1965 GTO, it has a Pontiac 400 in it. Stock, it came with the 389, but honestly, if you're looking for the proper spring rate when you're trying to do the coilovers, the spring rate for a GTO on this one is a 550 pound spring. A lot of these companies are gonna advertise the spring rate for a small block or for a big block. And since Pontiac, Buicks kind of ride in between the small and the big block, I actually contacted the guys at Aldan American and said, hey, what's the spring rate that you guys suggest? And 550 is the spring rate. This spring also has the ability to lower the car 2 inches. Right now, these are 2-inch drop springs, but I'm assuming either the rate isn't enough, and that's kind of why I'm having issues with the spring. Regardless of the spring rates of the two, we should be able to adjust out any of this rubbing and stiffening the springs a little bit. The caliper's out of the way. What I've gone through and done now is I pulled the cotter pin back here on the steering knuckle, and I loosened up the nut just a hair. And also on the sway bar is completely removed here, so this is ready to come off. I took the nut off the top of the shock absorber, and underneath on the bottom side here, I loosened up but did not completely remove these from the shock and the spring setup. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna take the jack and we're gonna lift up and apply just enough pressure that we can take this nut off. At that point, while we have this control arm under tension, we'll be able to pull that nut off and then slowly lower it down because this spring is gonna be pushing back down onto our jack. So this is a ball joint cup. So if you were to put the jack on here, you can actually cave this in. You'll probably have all the stuff gooping out of it. So we've got to find a way of lifting this control arm up in the air without messing that up. So right now we're putting tension on the coil spring, and we're gonna come back here and try to loosen up the nut on the ball joint here. If it's too tight, then we're gonna have to bring the jack up a little bit more. Fucking, I hate working on this thing, dude. It's like, it's nerve-wracking. Okay, so right now there's about a 1/2 inch gap between my castle nut and the rubber bushing here on my ball joint. So Kevin will release the jack. And as he releases the jack, most likely this gap is gonna stay here. And so I'll give this a tap with a hammer until it goes ping and drops down to it. Then I'll re-bring the jack up and lower it down again. Ah, so it did it on its own, beautiful. So now that brought it right down in here. Kevin's gonna bring it up and raise it up so I can get my castle nut off of there. And then we are ready to lower this down. See. All right, so now that we've got the whole spring set up down here, we're gonna take the 2 bolts out of the shock and pull it out of there. You don't wanna have a spring that's under tension on a jack that's barely hanging on for dear life, but we had to get the shock out. So you definitely wanna pull the shock out first. Kevin's gonna finagle this down. That's a big spring, and on this car, it is so big, I would totally suggest getting a spring compressor. Go rent one from your local store and put one of those on there. Oh, here she goes. Bang. All right. This control arm is up against the exhaust back here. So I don't think we're gonna be able to get this out of here without taking and compressing this spring, because it is an enormous spring, but we're gonna give it a shot here. So here are the new springs that are gonna go in on our coilover setup. This is the old guy. So we actually had to run to the parts store and get a compressor to get up in there and get it out because the exhaust was prohibiting it from getting it out. So yeah, other than that, we ready to do this?
Moving right along.
All right, bud. So we're looking over here on the passenger side. A few things that we've learned on the passenger side versus the driver is the first thing on this vehicle is take your shock out and get it out now while this is all together, because once this A-arm is down and it's off of the spindle, it's gonna be hard to get the shock out. So we're actually gonna remove the bolts now. It's easier to get to them up here while it's in the state. The only downside of removing these shocks is that these shocks have actually been sprayed body color to match the car, so that kind of breaks my heart to do. So this kit doesn't actually come with the spanner wrench, so you have to get this separate, and these are the needle bearings, and this for the thrust, I think it's called the thrust washer kit. So this goes on here where the spring, so as you adjust this, it makes it a little bit easier with having it, but and these are my son's socks. This is our coilover setup that is about to go in. So right now we have both of the shocks set to 1 for giggles. We're just gonna literally take off this top nut here, the bushing and the washer, and insert it up. Just let that fall anywhere it wants there. This will go up inside there. Before we put the spring on here, you wanna get some of this copper anti-seize. You got cat pee in your eye once, didn't you, bud?
I remember.
Pow. Okay. You got expandable insulation foam in your eye and your mouth and stuff once.
Oh, is that what it was? Okay.
Right now, Kevin is tightening up the 2 14mm bolts on the bottom. All right, so we have the jack, got our coil spring up under tension, and we had our ball joint is into the spindle, so we'll put the nut on there to keep it stable. And then up top, we have our shock coming up through the top. Our castle nut back on here. And up top here, we're about ready to set our 1 nut. Ready to get our wrench on there and adjust the hell out of this thing. This wrench that came with this Aldan American setup here, there's like 2 notches on this whole coupling, so it's like a real pain in the neck to get the wrench on there and actually turn this thing. And we had to keep it all the way down low and not taking the slack out so we could get this thing in, you know, so that the spring wasn't under compression and it would have not worked out. And we're fighting it. He's like feeling the back, trying to get it. The wrench is stuck. Like, Kevin just goes, why did you pick these springs?
Long story short, this sucks.
I don't know if the QA1 or the other ones have more than just 4, but it would be nice if you had, hey, I know, you could add a notch here, a notch here. How about add 16 notches and not 4? So we have the coilovers in, and we've got it actually turned up about halfway. And so this side over here, we actually put on everything, tightened everything up, and then we use the tool and try to pull it out of this basket. And so down in here, there's kind of like a lip and a basket, and it's a little hard to get this goofy wrench that comes with it in there, and there's only 4 spots on it to grab it. So that was really a pain. So on this side over here, we actually just took the spindle loose again and popped it off, lowered the control arm down. We spun this up halfway by hand, and now it's in a spot where you can easily put the wrench on it and adjust it and go with it. We're just gonna put the brake rotors on, put the wheels on, lower it down, see where it sits, see how the suspension clears. And if it's too low, then we're just gonna bring it back up and raise these. You have to adjust these while it's up in the air. Kevin, on a level of 1 to 10, how fun is this?
11. Spinal tap.
Good answer. She slammed, dude. Yeah, So it effectively made the problem worse. I mean, it looks badass. So I actually had coil springs in here that were an inch drop, and I had to put stock springs in. And the inch drop springs, it sat super low like this, but the suspension wouldn't clear the car. It looked, I mean, this looks sick. It's like on the ground, but. All right, so we just took this thing for a test drive, and it rides great. It rides like a Cadillac. It rides really, really well. And the issue that we found out is that this side over here, when you press down on it, it's flopping around. The A-arm is flopping around out of control. And this side is as stiff as a race car. Kevin, give it a good little push, and let's show what the A-arm does on this side over here when you're pushing on it. All right, that A-arm's flopping all around, floppy ding-dong, and he's pushing that. And then over on this side, he's gonna do it, and it's like he can't even get it to move. It's like barely moving. And Kevin had a brilliant idea. Is if you look at this engine, everything is on this side. You've got this heavy battery, power steering pump, alternator, this huge disc brake conversion stuff that was never here, with the big power brakes set up because it's a dual master. Well, I think it might have been a single master. Yeah, because my 66 in it. It's got this. Was a, yeah, single. Yeah, it's got this huge power steering gearbox. It's got even the weight from the added clutch and the wiper motor. It's got all this weight situated on this side, and over here, crickets, right? Nothing. And I think that's a pretty good conclusion, Kevin, that this side almost needs like a heavier spring weight because all this stuff, if we had the AC over here to kind of balance this out, that would help it a little bit. But definitely I think that's why notoriously this has been the issue with the car. We did have some rubbing. We took some really hard corners on it, a couple hard corners, and we're like, crap, we didn't fix it. So we might be able to raise the height of this a little bit, which sucks, but definitely I think that's probably the issue that we're having. To this side it's loose as a goose, but it does ride really good, minus that. Okay, so the car is drivable, everything's all set up. We actually measured on both sides of the coilovers and made sure from the collar down to the end of the coilover that it was 3.5 on the passenger side and 3.5 inches on the driver's side. And then we also cross-compared that to the height of the headlights just to make sure that, you know, the car was sitting level in case one side needed to be a little bit higher on the coil spring, especially because this driver's side has more weight. So there's a little bit of just measuring and doing that stuff that I didn't record for you in the video. But if you got this far with it, that should be a real easy thing for you to figure out. Other than that, I'm actually pretty impressed with the Aldan American springs. They are a little bit bouncy. You know, the car rode real smooth before. Now it feels kind of like a 370Z driving around. It's a little kind of bopping around a bit, but kind of feels a little more sporty. But I've been driving it for the last 24 years on the other springs. I mean, the other springs were new compared to the ones I had 20 years ago, but the ones that were currently in here were for the last 5 years or so. But it's still rubbing on the one side, so I'm probably gonna have to bring the whole car up, obviously about another 1/4 inch, probably do that. Make sure if you're adjusting these to actually take the weight off the car before you adjust them. Other than that, I'm glad you guys stuck around. If you have any issues, any comments, leave them in the comments below for any questions. I'll put a link to the springs that are for this car. They have a couple different sets. This one didn't come with the spanner wrench. I also have a link on there for the spanner wrench and the thrust bearings if you're going to do this on your own. But any questions, like I said, leave in the comments and I'll try to get around to it. I'm pretty good at answering questions. Other than that, thanks for watching this episode. Make sure you guys have clicked that subscribe button. I really want to put AC in this car. So, you know, make sure you stick around and we can throw some air conditioning in this bad boy. And other than that, check you later. Check you later. All right, all right, all right. If you're not getting all the references, it's dazed and confused. Come on now. Here's to working on a GTO, drinking LaCroix. We need to go get some Miller Lite, I guess, huh? Is that what dude bros do? Hillbillies? We're not hillbilly enough to be fixing this thing, dude. People are gonna quit watching this video right now. Like, these guys are drinking LaCroix? Yeah, no. Done.